It was one of those mornings that seemed to promise nothing but peace. The air at Cedar Grove Campground was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. You could hear the faint splash of fish breaking the lake's surface and the low hum of insects waking up with the sun. For most people here, it was just another quiet summer day. For Clara Hughes, it was the kind of morning she had always loved. Clara had spent more than 40 years in nursing, long shifts, night calls, the constant hum of monitors in sterile hospital rooms. She had been there for strangers' first breaths and their last. She had comforted families through heartbreak and exhaustion. But in 2020, she finally stepped away from it all. She and her husband, Henry, bought a silver Class C RV and made a promise. They would see the country one campground at a time. Cedar Grove was supposed to be just another stop along the way. Nestled beside Pinecrest Lake in rural Oregon, it had that rare combination of beauty and calm. They'd been here for 2 weeks already, long enough to know which sites got the best morning light and where to watch the sunset over the water. For Clara, it had also become the perfect place for her daily walks. That Sunday night, the two of them had sat outside by a small campfire, Henry nursing a cup of coffee while Clara told him about the route she wanted to try the next morning. County Road 42 curved along the lake for a while before cutting into a quiet stretch of forest. It was a little longer than her usual walk, but she liked the sound of it. At 7:15 the next morning, Henry woke to the sound of the coffee pot sputtering. Clara was already dressed, her silver blonde hair pulled back, a bright red windbreaker zipped halfway over a plain white t-shirt. She moved around the RV with the same steady rhythm she had in the hospital, efficient, purposeful. They ate together at the small table, oatmeal for her, toast and eggs for him. She laughed when he reminded her to keep an eye out for wildlife. "I'm more worried about tripping over my own feet," she joked. By 7:50, she was lacing up her gray running shoes at the RV's door. She had her phone in the pocket of her leggings, a reusable stainless steel water bottle in one hand. Her smartwatch, the one Henry had given her last Christmas, was already tracking her steps. She leaned in for a quick kiss, told him she'd be back in about an hour, maybe a little more. Then she stepped out into the morning sun. Henry watched her walk toward the gravel path that led to the campground's main road, the red of her jacket catching the light through the trees. He closed the door and went back to the sink to rinse their dishes. In his mind, there was no reason to think this walk would be any different from the dozens she had taken before. At 8:15, Clara's smartwatch would later confirm, she was moving at a steady pace, brisk, but not rushed. She passed the last of the RVs, then the small wooden sign marking the edge of Cedar Grove. Beyond that, County Road 42 stretched out in a gentle curve. To her right was the lake, still and glassy. To her left, the forest rose in dense green walls. For the first half hour, nothing seemed unusual. A few early morning anglers waved from the shore. A pair of cyclists rode past, heading the other way. At 8:23, her pace slowed slightly, maybe to take a sip of water, maybe to check a song on her phone. By all accounts, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Henry, back at the RV, had settled into the driver's seat with the morning paper and a second cup of coffee. He didn't keep constant track of the time. It wasn't until he glanced at his watch at 10:05 that he realized Clara should have been back by now. He told himself she might have taken the longer loop around the campground. Still, something in his gut felt off. By 10:20, that uneasy feeling had sharpened. He stepped outside, scanning the path for the flash of red that never came. He tried her phone. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. Clara's phone was never off during her walks. She liked to play music aloud, not through earbuds, so she could still hear approaching cars or animals. At 10:35, he made the call. The dispatcher's voice was calm but direct. What was her name? What was she wearing? When did she leave? Henry answered each question as best he could, though he realized he couldn't remember the exact color of her leggings. The dispatcher told him to have a recent photo ready for the responding officers and to call back immediately if she returned before they arrived. Cedar Grove wasn't the kind of place where sirens were common. When the first patrol car rolled into the campground around 11:05, heads turned. Officer Mark Benton stepped out, tall and wiry in a navy windbreaker with "Sheriff" in bold yellow across the chest. He took Henry's statement, asked to see the RV in case Clara had returned without him noticing. Then he headed out to check County Road 42. By 11:20, Benton's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got something here." Just a quarter-mile from the campground's edge, in a patch of grass pressed down by heavy tires, lay a bright red windbreaker. Nearby, a white baseball cap lay upside down, its brim caked with dirt. A single gray running shoe sat a few feet away, its laces still tied. There were other details, small but impossible to ignore. 2 deep ruts in the grass, leading from the shoulder into the brush, as if a vehicle had swerved hard off the road. Black plastic fragments scattered in the weeds. The silver oval of a Ford logo, face down in the dirt. And, as Benton knelt to photograph the scene, the glint of a crushed beer can half hidden under a branch. By the time 2 more deputies arrived to secure the area, Henry was standing at the edge of the yellow tape, hands clenched into fists. Benton told him it was too soon to draw conclusions, but the truth was already pressing in. Clara hadn't just wandered off. Something had happened here. And whatever it was, it didn't look like an accident. The first minutes after a missing person report are rarely dramatic. There are no flashing lights, no instant answers, just the slow gathering of details, the quiet suspicion that something isn't right. When Henry hung up with the 911 dispatcher, he stood by the RV's small dinette table, staring at Clara's half-finished coffee cup. Steam no longer rose from it. It was just lukewarm liquid now, the color of fading memories. He tried her phone again. Straight to voicemail. Each ringless connection felt heavier than the last. The Cedar Grove Campground wasn't large, maybe 30 sites tucked between the lake and the trees, and the news spread quickly. A couple from site number 14 came by to ask if they could help. A young father from across the way offered to take his bike and ride along the shoreline trail. Henry thanked them but didn't move from his post near the RV door, afraid that if he left, she might somehow appear. At 11:05 a.m., a Lincoln County Sheriff's cruiser pulled in, tires crunching over gravel. The man who stepped out was Officer Mark Benton, tall, lean, early 40s, with the weathered look of someone used to long days outdoors. His uniform windbreaker was unzipped, revealing a plain gray polo shirt, and a badge hung heavy from his belt. He approached Henry with calm, steady steps, clipboard in hand. "Sir, I understand your wife is missing. Let's start from the top." Henry recounted everything. The time she left, the route she usually took, the red jacket, the water bottle, the phone. Benton's pen scratched quickly across the paper. Any health issues? Anything that might cause her to become disoriented? Henry shook his head. "She's healthy. Never missed a walk in her life." When Benton asked to take a quick look inside the RV, Henry stepped aside. The officer's eyes swept over the neat interior, bed made, shoes lined by the door, a tablet charging on the counter. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. By 11:15, Benton was back in his cruiser, driving slowly down the gravel path toward the road. He kept the window open, scanning the tree line for a flash of red. County Road 42 lay ahead, 2 narrow lanes of cracked asphalt, the yellow center lines faded to a ghost of paint. He turned east, toward the direction Clara had most likely gone. The road curved gently along the lakeshore, then disappeared into a tunnel of pine. Benton's training told him to look not just on the road, but off it, into ditches, through breaks in the undergrowth. A missing hiker could be injured just a few feet from the pavement and invisible to passing cars. At 11:20 he saw it. A bright slash of color against the green, red fabric, half hidden in tall grass. He slowed, shifted into park, and stepped out. The windbreaker lay crumpled on its side, zipper half open. The ground around it was disturbed, flattened grass, shallow depressions. A few feet away, a white baseball cap lay upside down, the brim stained with dirt. Benton's gaze followed a faint trail of impressions through the grass, and that's when he saw the tire tracks, 2 deep grooves cutting from the asphalt into the brush. They didn't meander like someone pulling over. They bit into the ground at an angle, like a sudden, sharp turn. He radioed it in. Possible scene, County Road 42, quarter-mile east of campground entrance. Request backup. While waiting, he crouched to get a better look. Scattered near the tracks were shards of black plastic, the kind that might come from a vehicle's grille. One piece was small enough to fit in his palm. Another was bigger, the center oval of a Ford logo, face down in the weeds. And there was one more thing, the glint of aluminum under a branch. He reached for it and pulled out a crushed beer can, Michelob Ultra printed in bold blue letters. The pull tab was still attached. Benton didn't touch it again. He set it gently back down for evidence checks. By the time deputies Allen and Ruiz arrived, the scene had been marked off with yellow tape. The three of them worked in silence, each taking a sector. Benton stayed near the initial finds, Allen walked the eastbound shoulder, Ruiz moved west. At 11:32, Allen called out, "Got a shoe." It was a gray running shoe, women's size, laces still tied. Henry would later confirm it matched the pair Clara had worn that morning. But only one shoe, the left, was here. The right was nowhere in sight. Allen also noted that the placement of the shoe and jacket didn't line up with an ordinary pedestrian accident. In most hit-and-run cases, personal items are thrown forward or to the side, following the motion of the body on impact. Here, everything seemed clustered in the grass, as though Clara had been pulled into it, not thrown. Benton's mind was already moving toward the possibility no officer wants to voice this early, abduction. Back at the campground, Henry had been told only that they'd found some items and were expanding the search. He didn't ask for details, maybe afraid of the answers. He sat at the picnic table outside their RV, staring at the lake. Every few minutes, he would glance toward the entrance road, hoping for the impossible, to see Clara, walking in with that easy smile of hers, saying she just lost track of time. Meanwhile, Benton was making a call for K-9 units. Within 40 minutes, 2 officers arrived with dogs trained to follow human scent. They began at the spot where the jacket lay. The dogs sniffed, circled, then moved steadily along the tire tracks into the brush. They went only about 30 feet before stopping, noses working the air, tails stiff. Then, almost in unison, they turned back toward the road, toward the tracks that led away. The handler looked at Benton and gave the nod neither of them wanted to give. She didn't stay here. She was taken. Benton felt the weight of the case settle in. A missing hiker could be lost for hours and still walk back into camp. But a deliberate removal from the scene, that was a different story entirely. What they didn't know yet was that somewhere out there, beyond the lake and the forest, someone was already holding the answers. Answers they weren't going to give up easily. By early afternoon, the search had already stretched beyond Cedar Grove and County Road 42. Patrol cars were moving slowly along rural routes, deputies knocking on the few doors within a mile of the scene. Most of the people they spoke to hadn't seen anything unusual that morning. The quiet here was a way of life. Traffic was sparse, visitors even more so. At the makeshift command post back at the campground, Officer Benton and 2 detectives reviewed what they had so far. It wasn't much: a red jacket, a cap, a single shoe, tire tracks, plastic vehicle fragments, and a beer can. They had no confirmed eyewitness, no footage from security cameras, the campground didn't have any, and the road was too remote for traffic cams. Henry sat at the picnic table outside his RV, waiting for someone to tell him they'd found her. He'd given them her phone number, the serial number for her smartwatch, and her iPad that she sometimes used to check her walk stats. Detective Sarah Whitaker, a younger member of the unit with a knack for digital forensics, picked up the tablet and asked Henry if Clara had the Find My feature enabled. "She does," Henry said, "but her phone's off. I've tried calling a dozen times." Still, it was worth a shot. Whitaker tapped through the menus, logged into Clara's account, and waited. A map appeared, empty. The phone's icon was grayed out, last seen hours ago, its location unknown. "Powered off," Whitaker muttered. "That's not good." She was about to set the iPad aside when Henry added, "She wears that fitness watch every time she walks. Syncs it here to check her steps. It might still have something." That got Whitaker's attention. She opened the fitness app. The data began to load, showing the familiar arc of Clara's morning walk, from the RV to the road, around the lake's curve. At 7:50 a.m., her step count started climbing steadily. At 8:23, her pace slowed slightly, nothing unusual. But at 8:37, the graph flatlined. Movement had stopped completely. "What about here?" Benton asked, pointing to a brief spike minutes later. At 8:51, Whitaker said, "There's a small burst of motion, maybe being moved, maybe struggling. It lasts about 60 seconds. Then nothing. And it hasn't synced again since." That 60-second burst gnawed at them. It meant that at least for that brief window, the watch was still on her wrist and still tracking. After that, either it had been removed, destroyed, or gone out of range of her iPad. Whitaker forwarded the watch's last data point to the tech unit at the sheriff's office, asking them to cross-check it with known coordinates from the area. But in this part of Oregon, dense forest and rolling hills made precision difficult. The best they could get was a circle of possible location, more than 6 miles in diameter. It was a search zone too big to cover in a single day. Back at headquarters, Detective Aaron Miles, who was assigned to liaison with the phone company, got a call from a contact at the carrier. He came jogging back into the command post, breathless but with a spark in his eye. "They just got a ping from her SIM card," he said. Benton straightened. "Her phone's still off." "It's not in her phone anymore," Miles replied. "Her SIM's active, but in a different device, a Samsung Galaxy. And they've got the IMEI. Whitaker was already pulling a legal pad closer. "Who's it registered to?" "Name's Travis Morton. 31. Lives in Maple Falls, 20 minutes north. Owns a 2012 black Ford F-150. Miles paused. Registration matches the fragments from the scene, same grill pattern, same paint code. The pieces clicked into place with an awful kind of logic. The Ford logo, the black plastic shards, the tire tracks, the missing phone. Whoever had taken Clara had her phone, stripped the SIM, and put it into their own device. And that device belonged to a man with the exact kind of truck they were looking for. Benton's voice was low but firm. "We move on him today." They started with his address. Maple Falls wasn't much bigger than Cedar Grove. A few streets of modest houses, some light industrial buildings, a gas station, and a single grocery store. Morton's listed residence was a small rental on the edge of town. By the time 2 unmarked cars and a patrol unit rolled up, the curtains were drawn and the driveway was empty. A quick call to his employer, a regional hardware supply company, revealed that Morton was on a week's leave. He'd told his supervisor his cousin had COVID and he needed to help out. That meant he had all the time in the world to be anywhere or nowhere. They set up a perimeter around town, unmarked cars cruising the main roads, keeping eyes open for a black Ford F-150 with front-end damage. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, stretching the shadows across the streets. Then, just after 4 p.m., a patrol officer spotted it, a black F-150 parked in the far corner of a Walmart lot. The front grille was gone entirely. The hood was crumpled, the paint scuffed to bare metal. Even from a distance, you could tell it had been in a serious collision. Morton was in the driver's seat, reclined, eyes closed, maybe asleep, maybe pretending. Benton approached from the passenger side, another deputy covering the driver's. When Morton's eyes fluttered open, he looked dazed as if surfacing from a long sleep. The cuffs went on without a struggle. In the back of the cruiser, Morton kept his gaze fixed out the window. Benton didn't press him right away. He knew the real work would happen in the interview room. Still, one thing was clear even before they asked a single question. This man, this truck, and Clara's disappearance were bound together by more than coincidence. For Henry, who was told of the arrest a short time later, relief and dread came in equal measure. They might have found the man who took his wife, but they hadn't found her. And deep down, he feared what that might mean. Somewhere out there, beyond the edges of the search grid, the answers still waited. The interview room at the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office was small, square, and painted the same neutral gray as thousands of others across the country. A single table sat in the middle, 2 chairs on each side, a small camera mounted in the upper corner, its red light blinking steadily. When Travis Morton was led inside, he moved slowly, his hands cuffed in front of him. He wore a faded black hoodie and dark jeans, both creased from hours of sitting in the truck. His eyes flicked briefly toward the camera before settling on the table. Detective Mark Benton didn't sit across from him right away. Instead, he let another man step in, Detective Daniel Hart, the department's most experienced interrogator. Hart had a reputation for building rapport with suspects, drawing them into conversation before they realized how much they were revealing. Hart entered carrying 2 bottles of water. He placed one in front of Morton, sat down, and opened his own. "Long day," he said casually. "I'm Dan. I work here in Lincoln County. You're Travis, right?" Morton nodded once, his shoulders slightly hunched. "I'm not here to yell at you," Hart continued. "I just want to understand what happened today and yesterday. You work construction, right? Or was it something else?" Morton muttered, "Hardware supply." His voice was low, almost flat. They started there. Hart asked about his job, his schedule, the kind of work he did. He asked about Maple Falls, about the truck. All the while, he wove in small bits about himself, how he grew up in a small town, how he understood long hours and hard work. Only after 20 minutes did Hart shift the focus. "So, this morning, we found your truck in the Walmart lot. Looks like it's been in a bad accident. What happened?" Morton leaned back, looking at the wall. "Hit a deer," he said. "When?" "Couple days ago. Saturday night, maybe Sunday morning." Hart kept his voice even. "And this morning?" Morton hesitated, eyes darting briefly to the camera. "Fog was bad out by the lake. A woman, came out of nowhere. I couldn't stop." Hart didn't contradict him. "That must have been a shock. Did you try to help her?" Another pause. "I put her in the truck. I didn't know what else to do." Hart nodded slowly, as if he understood. "Was she alive when you found her?" Morton's jaw tightened. "No. She was gone." Hart let the silence stretch. Then, softly, "Where is she now, Travis?" For the first time, Morton's gaze shifted from the table to Hart's face. His lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know if I should say." Hart leaned in slightly. "Her husband is sitting in a room down the hall right now, not knowing if she's alive. You can change that." Morton's eyes flickered. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Pine Hollow Park." Hart straightened just enough to keep his expression neutral. "You can take us there?" Morton nodded once. "Yeah, I can take you." By late afternoon, an unmarked SUV rolled out of the sheriff's lot with Morton in the back seat, flanked by 2 deputies. Hart sat in the passenger seat, a map spread across his lap, though the route was simple. Pine Hollow Park was 15 miles south, down a winding county road that cut through farmland before disappearing into dense forest. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the tires on asphalt. Morton stared out the window, his hands cuffed in front of him, his fingers twitching every few minutes. Hart kept his eyes forward, occasionally asking for turns, though Morton's directions were clear enough. After 20 minutes, they reached a narrow gravel turnoff marked by a weathered wooden sign, Pine Hollow State Recreation Area. The parking lot was empty. The late-day sun filtered through the trees in long, golden shafts. Morton leaned forward slightly. "Down there," he said, nodding toward a dirt service road blocked by a chain. The deputies cut the lock and drove in slowly, tires crunching over fallen pine needles. The road wound through the trees for about a quarter mile before opening into a small clearing. Morton spoke again, his voice lower now. Right over there." They stopped. Hart and the deputies stepped out, leaving Morton in the SUV under the watch of another officer. Following the line of Morton's gesture, Hart walked toward a patch of tall grass near the edge of the clearing. It took only a few steps before he saw it, the bright reflection of metal against the grass, an empty water bottle. Just beyond, partially concealed by weeds and underbrush, was Clara Hughes. She lay on her side, her silver blonde hair tangled, her red jacket gone. Hart stopped a few feet away, signaling to the others. "We've got her," he said quietly into his radio. The forensic team arrived within the hour. They photographed everything, the disturbed earth where she lay, the broken stems of grass, the faint impression of tire tread nearby. Her smartwatch was gone. Her shoes were missing, save for one found earlier at the roadside. Henry Hughes was told that evening. The words landed like stones in his chest, each one heavier than the last. He didn't ask for details, not yet. All he wanted to know was whether they'd caught the man responsible. Yes, Benton told him. We have him. Back at the sheriff's office, Morton's interview resumed, but now there was no pretense. The photographs of the clearing were laid in front of him. This is where you left her, isn't it? Hart asked. Morton nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. Why there? Quiet, Morton muttered. No one goes there. Did you know her? He shook his head. Never seen her before. Hart let out a slow breath. Then tell me, Travis, why? Why take her off the road? Why not call for help? Morton's fingers flexed against the cuffs. His answer was barely audible. I panicked. But Hart had been doing this too long to accept that at face value. He knew the evidence they already had would tell a much darker story. And in the days ahead, they'd uncover proof that this had been no accident at all. When the forensics team brought the black Ford F-150 into the secure bay at the sheriff's impound lot, they treated it like a crime scene on wheels. Every inch was photographed before anyone touched a thing. The hood was dented in a wide arc, the kind you'd expect from a direct impact. The missing grille matched the jagged edges of the plastic fragments recovered at County Road 42. But the most telling evidence wasn't in plain sight. It was hidden in the places only an experienced investigator knows to look. Technician Maria Lawson began with the exterior. Along the passenger side bumper and lower panel, faint streaks of dried reddish-brown ran vertically toward the ground. Swabs were taken immediately. Above the running board, on the edge of the rear passenger door, there was another faint smear, too high to be from the road. Inside, the smell of cleaning chemicals was strong, almost sharp enough to sting the eyes. The floor mats looked damp in spots, their fibers clumped together. Under the passenger seat, Lawson's gloved hand brushed against something soft, a wad of fabric. When she pulled it out, the room went quiet. It was a section of black athletic shorts, torn unevenly along one leg seam, the elastic waistband stretched and frayed. The shorts were tagged, bagged, and set aside. Then came the second discovery, a pair of blue-handled scissors shoved deep into the seat pocket behind the driver's seat. The blades bore faint reddish discoloration and small frays of synthetic fiber, the same type as the torn shorts. From the cab, the team moved to the bed of the truck. A scattering of pine needles covered the metal floor, along with a few small spots that, under the alternate light source, fluoresced in that unmistakable way dried blood does. Near the cab wall, half hidden under a folded tarp, they found a stainless steel travel mug with a dent in the side. It was empty, but swabbed for prints and DNA. Then, in the child safety seat strapped to the rear bench, they made a discovery that shifted the tone of the investigation entirely. A used condom, sealed in an evidence bag by the end of the shift. Later testing would confirm the presence of DNA from both Clara Hughes and Travis Morton. While the truck was being processed, Benton and Hart worked on the search warrant for Morton's residence. The small rental house in Maple Falls was sparsely furnished. A worn couch, a flat-screen TV, and a cluttered kitchen counter. But in the bedroom, the real evidence waited. Morton's laptop sat open on a desk, the power lights still glowing. A quick look at the browser history made Benton's jaw tighten. Dozens of searches, stretching back weeks, were variations of the same disturbing theme, sexual content involving violence and corpses. Many were bookmarked. Several videos had been downloaded and saved locally. His phone told a similar story. In the hours after Clara's disappearance, while she was still missing and her husband was calling her name, Morton had searched for explicit videos, watched live adult broadcasts, and scrolled through social media without a trace of urgency. And then there was the timeline. Cell tower records showed Morton's phone moving from County Road 42 to Pine Hollow Park that morning, stopping for more than 20 minutes in the clearing where Clara was later found. The evidence painted a picture that was as clear as it was horrifying. Clara's death had not been the result of an unavoidable accident. She had been targeted. When confronted with the findings, Morton shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing at the photographs laid out before him. Benton didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "These are your scissors," Benton said, tapping the evidence photo. Fibers from Clara's shorts matched the cut. "These are your searches, your laptop, your phone. That's your DNA in that truck." And this, he pointed to the photo of the child's seat, is where we found something we can't explain away as panic. Morton swallowed hard but said nothing. Hart leaned forward, his voice low. You want to tell us again about the fog? About her stepping into your lane? Morton's silence was answer enough. Back at the lab, the results came in one by one. The reddish stains on the truck's bumper, door, and bed, all confirmed as Clara Hughes's blood. The fabric from the shorts matched the fibers caught in the scissor blades. The DNA profile from the condom in the child's seat matched the one recovered from the clearing in Pine Hollow Park. The physical evidence was now backed by the digital trail. The SIM card from Clara's phone in Morton's Samsung device, activated hours after she vanished. GPS data placing him at the scene, the absence of any call to emergency services, and the deliberate steps taken to clean his truck and dispose of items at a local car wash. When prosecutors saw the file, there was no hesitation. The charge sheet would list first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault. Henry Hughes was briefed on the evidence, though the detectives spared him some of the more graphic details. He listened quietly, hands folded on the table, eyes fixed somewhere far away. When Benton finished, Henry asked only one question: will he ever get out? No, Benton said. Not if we do our jobs. Henry nodded once, his jaw tight. Then do them. The case had moved from a desperate search for a missing woman to the methodical dismantling of a killer's lies. And with every new piece of evidence, the story Morton had tried to spin about fog and panic fell apart. He hadn't just crossed paths with Clara Hughes. He had chosen her. And now, the choice of what happened to him would belong to a jury. By the time the Lincoln County Prosecutor's Office formally announced the charges, the public had already decided what they thought of Travis Morton. The details had trickled out in press briefings: the discovery of Clara Hughes in Pine Hollow Park, the forensic evidence in Morton's truck, the disturbing search history on his devices. Small-town Oregon didn't see many cases like this. In the weeks before the trial, the courthouse in Newport became a kind of gathering place. On hearing days, family members of both the victim and the accused filed through the same double doors, avoiding each other's eyes. The local paper ran features on Clara's life, her decades of nursing, the trips she and Henry had taken in their RV, alongside the court updates that felt more clinical, almost sterile by comparison. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was different. Here, the case had to be stripped of emotion and built from the ground up with facts, exhibits, and testimony. The prosecution's lead attorney, Ellen Martinez, was known for her methodical style. She didn't try to shock the jury. She simply laid out the evidence one piece at a time, letting the weight of it accumulate. Her opening statement was straightforward. This case is not about an accident. It is about a choice, a deliberate act carried out with intent. We will show you that Travis Morton struck Clara Hughes with his truck, removed her from the scene, and committed acts no person should endure. We will show you that this was not panic. This was predation. On the defense side, attorney Michael Crane tried to plant seeds of doubt from the start. He described Morton as a man who made a terrible mistake in the fog, emphasizing that no one had seen the moment of impact. He suggested the sexual assault evidence was inconclusive and that DNA transfer could have happened through unexplained circumstances. But Martinez had something Crane couldn't counter: a timeline that fit together like puzzle pieces. The jury heard from Henry Hughes first. He spoke calmly, his voice steady, describing the last morning he saw his wife. When Martinez asked what kind of person Clara was, Henry smiled faintly. She helped strangers for a living, he said. She knew how to make people feel safe. Even on her walks, she'd wave to everyone. Next came the forensic technicians. Maria Lawson walked the jury through the truck photos, pointing to each reddish smear, each fiber match. The blue-handled scissors were passed around in a sealed evidence box. The torn black shorts were displayed alongside microscopic images of the cut fibers, clean, precise, matching the scissor blades exactly. The digital forensics expert followed, explaining the SIM card transfer, the GPS data, and the search history on Morton's laptop. The jurors leaned forward as screenshots of browser entries were displayed on the monitor: violent encounters, corpse fantasy, and timestamps that matched the hours after Clara was last seen alive. When it was time for the medical examiner, the room went still. Dr. Rachel Emerson spoke with quiet authority, detailing the injuries Clara sustained. She confirmed that the impact from the truck was immediately fatal, multiple fractures, catastrophic internal injuries. Martinez asked her to clarify one point. Would the victim have been able to walk away after being struck? No, Emerson said. She would have died within moments. That answer undercut the defense's suggestion that Clara could have been alive for some time and that any later contact might have been consensual. Morton himself did not take the stand. His attorney advised against it, likely knowing the cross-examination would be brutal. Instead, the defense relied on trying to chip away at the prosecution's evidence, questioning whether the blood could have been transferred in other ways, whether the DNA on the condom was contaminated, whether the tire tracks could belong to another F-150. But Martinez's case had redundancy built in. For every point the defense raised, there was a backup, additional lab reports, matching fibers, corroborating witness statements. One of those witnesses was Jack Miller, the local resident who'd seen Clara on County Road 42 that morning. He testified that the weather was clear, that she was walking against traffic just as safety guidelines recommend, and that she was holding her jacket, not wearing it, a direct contradiction to Morton's fog story. The most damning moment came when Martinez played surveillance footage from a self-service car wash in Maple Falls, taken the evening of Clara's disappearance. It showed Morton's black F-150 pulling into a bay. For the next 30 minutes, he worked with single-minded focus, spraying the exterior, scrubbing the wheels, tossing items into a nearby trash bin. An evidence technician then took the stand to confirm that items retrieved from that bin, a blood-stained towel, a pair of gloves, and a torn section of Clara's shorts, all tested positive for her DNA. By the time the prosecution rested, the weight of the evidence felt almost physical in the room. In closing arguments, Martinez's tone was calm, almost conversational. There are cases where the evidence is circumstantial, where you must connect the dots yourselves. This is not one of those cases. The dots here are painted in bold lines. The evidence tells you where he was, what he did, and why the story he told you is a lie. This is not about fog. This is not about panic. This is about a man who saw an opportunity and took it, with devastating consequences for Clara Hughes and everyone who loved her. Crane's closing was more emotional, appealing to the idea that reasonable doubt is a safeguard, that the jury should not convict unless they were absolutely certain. He repeated the word accident half a dozen times. But his voice lacked the certainty that Martinez's carried. After nearly 3 weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. They were out less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, Henry sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly. Morton stared at the table. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant guilty." The rest of the verdicts followed, guilty on all counts. The judge looked directly at Morton as he pronounced the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. For Henry, there was no joy in the outcome, only the quiet relief of knowing the man who took Clara from him would never harm anyone else. Outside the courthouse, the reporters gathered, their cameras clicking. Henry spoke briefly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the crowd. "She deserved more years," he said. "We can't get them back, but we can make sure no one forgets her." When the courtroom emptied that afternoon, the echo of the judge's gavel seemed to linger longer than it should have. Reporters packed up their equipment, jurors slipped out quietly, and the deputies led Travis Morton away through a side door, his shackles clinking faintly against the tile floor. Henry Hughes remained seated in the front row for a long while after the others had gone. The bench beneath him was hard, but he hardly noticed. His mind was back at Cedar Grove, picturing the red windbreaker, the glint of the lake through the pines, the sound of Clara's footsteps on gravel. The verdict hadn't brought her back. It hadn't erased the moment she disappeared from the path, or the hours of not knowing, or the weeks of evidence and testimony. But it had closed a door on the man who took her. And that, at least, meant no one else would walk through life's morning light only to cross his path. In the weeks after the trial, Cedar Grove Campground returned to its quiet routines. Travelers came and went, setting up their awnings, cooking over small propane stoves, launching kayaks into the calm water. To a casual visitor, nothing looked different. But for those who knew what had happened, there were reminders everywhere. The stretch of County Road 42 where Clara had last been seen became a kind of unspoken landmark. Some campers avoided it entirely. Others walked it deliberately, stopping to tie a ribbon to a tree or leave a small bunch of flowers in the grass. Henry came back once, in early spring, before the tourist season began. He parked the RV in the same spot they had stayed in together. The air was cold enough to see his breath, the lake still carrying thin sheets of ice along the edges. He walked the path she had taken that morning, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the familiar bends in the road. When he reached the place where the tire tracks had once scarred the grass, there was nothing visible now. Winter had smoothed it over, the grass grown back. But he stood there a long time anyway, hearing the faint rustle of pine needles overhead, feeling the weight of everything that had been lost. In Maple Falls, Morton's house sat empty. The landlord repainted the walls and replaced the carpet, trying to make it ready for the next tenant, but neighbors said it felt different, colder somehow. People walked past quickly, eyes straight ahead. The case remained in the news longer than most. True crime podcasts covered it, dissecting every movement from the red jacket to the SIM card swap. For weeks, Henry's phone filled with calls from strangers who wanted to express sympathy or outrage, or simply to say they'd been touched by Clara's story. Some of those messages came from people she'd treated during her decades as a nurse. They remembered the way she would adjust a pillow without being asked, or explain a procedure in plain words so it didn't sound so frightening. To them, Clara wasn't just a victim in a headline. She was a person who had been there for them when they needed someone most. In Cedar Grove's small town center, the community decided to create something lasting. A wooden bench was placed near the lakeshore trail, with a bronze plaque reading, "In memory of Clara Hughes, who walked here with kindness." It was simple, but that was how she would have wanted it. No speeches, no ceremony, just a place to sit and watch the water, the same way she had on those mornings before her walks. For Henry, the path forward wasn't about closure. The word didn't fit. It was about carrying Clara forward in the quiet ways, making the coffee the way she liked it, stopping to talk to strangers in campgrounds, listening for the soft rhythm of footsteps that he knew he would never hear again. Sometimes, at night in the RV, he would find himself glancing toward the passenger seat, expecting to see her there, looking at the map or pointing out a sign. The seat stayed empty, but the habit lingered. He told friends that the trial had given him justice, but memory was what gave him purpose. He wanted people to remember her as she lived, not just as she was lost. The file on the vanishing at Cedar Grove was closed in the Lincoln County Records Office, but in the minds of those who followed it, the story remained open, a reminder of how quickly an ordinary morning could fracture into something unrecognizable. And for anyone walking that lakeshore path on a cool Oregon morning, the sound of gravel underfoot carried with it the memory of a woman in a red windbreaker, moving steadily toward a horizon she would never reach.